Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing a video talking to you about this gorgeous rifle you see here in front of you. This is one of the Henry X models, one of their newer models of rifle, specifically chambered, if you couldn't tell, in 4570. Now I've actually been testing this thing out for quite a while, over a year now. If you guys have been living under a rock, there's been some weird things going on that have affected ammo availability, and 4570 has been one of the great casualties of that. So it's taken a while for me to get the amount of rounds I would like to get through this. So hence why it's taken so long to do the review here. At this point, I now have probably about 400 or so rounds of 4570 through this thing. So I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp of it, as well as a somewhat sore shoulder, as you'll see, to finally be able to do my review of this rifle. Now, before I get too far into it, in the interest of full disclosure, I do want to say that Henry did provide this rifle for free in order for me to be able to do a review of it. No money changed hands or anything like that. But again, I did not pay for this rifle. I did, however, pay for all the ammunition with the help of the supporters I have over on Patreon. But again, take all that information as you will before I get, again, too deep into this review. So with that being said, let's go ahead and show some footage of this thing in action, and then we'll talk about how this thing is set up and then what my overall thoughts are of it. So going over this rifle here, I'm going to go front to back here. Up front, kind of the star of the show with the X models is their ability to be suppressed straight out of the box. Now, this has been something that's been an issue in previous Henry models, the ability to do this easily, as we'll kind of go over as we work our way back on this gun. But first and foremost, we have our threaded barrel here in the front. Now, if I remember correctly, as I think I do, the thread pitch on this, unlike typical like 45 ACP thread pitch of 0.578 by 28, this is actually 5/8 by 24, which is your standard 30 cal thread pitch. So that is definitely something worth keeping in mind when it comes to actually putting a suppressor or any muzzle device, for that matter, on this gun. One of the reasons that it took a while to do the review of this is I wanted to obviously shoot it suppressed. However, one of the suppressors I wasn't able to test because a previous reviewer through Silencer Shop had actually basically disintegrated a muzzle device by putting a 30 caliber muzzle device on it and then sending a 4570 projectile through that, which thankfully, from what I understand, didn't damage the suppressor, but it did vaporize the muzzle device, and that caused some issues there. So just be very, very aware of what muzzle devices you're putting on this. There are some really cool options out there. I believe Ranger Point Precision makes a specific muzzle brake for this gun, which I do eventually plan on getting because the recoil of 4570 can be pretty stout. So all that to say, you do have a threaded barrel up here, which is a really cool thing to have in something that you're going to be using as a suppressor host. Moving back, we do have some fiber optic sights. Now, you do have an accessory rail option back here. It is drilled and tapped for an accessory rail. I do have an accessory rail for this, but I've honestly liked the fiber optic sights on this thing enough to really not be in a hurry to upgrade the sights on this to some sort of red dot optic or anything of that nature. You have a yellow front sight and then red rear sight. So unlike the typical buckhorn or semi-buckhorn sights you get on a lever gun. The fiber optic sights make this thing very quick and easy to get a sight picture on, which I'm a big fan of. Now, in low light situations or no light situations, you're going to run into some issues there. I do have a solution for that as we move back here in a second, but all that to say, I do really like the sights. The rear is windage adjustable by drifting in the dovetail, elevation adjustable with a little set screw here. I can say that in my case, I didn't have to adjust the sights at all, and pretty much with the exception of a little bit of elevation adjustment depending on velocity, I have found the accuracy to be sufficient that I haven't messed with the sights at all on this thing. So that is a good thing there. Moving slightly back here, we have our typical magazine tube. If you're not familiar with Henry rifles, this is kind of a standby on all of their guns. You have like a 1/16 of a turn, and then you can remove your magazine tube. You can remove it all the way if you want to, or you can just remove it to the point where hopefully you can see on the underside of the magazine tube here, this portion visible here. If I wanted to, and as you could do in older Henry rifles, you can load the magazine through there, basically pull this until it's open, drop one round at a time, rim first. It's kind of hard to mess up because you have the shape of the projectile or the cartridge there. Drop them in and then close your magazine tube. That method of loading has always been effective, however, less than preferable. The big change that they made with the X models, and honestly all of their models now, which I'm super happy to see, is the addition of a side loading gate. Now, that becomes extra important when we're talking about running a suppressor up here, because obviously the diameter of a suppressor is going to be larger than the diameter of the barrel here, which means if I have a suppressor attached and I want to be able to get this magazine tube out, I'm not going to be able to get it out without removing the suppressor. So by making this thing also side loading, I can now top off and reload the gun without having to remove the suppressor, which in my opinion makes life a lot well, it's not an opinion, it factually makes that a lot easier, but subjectively, in my opinion, makes this thing far more appealing from an end user perspective. If you've seen the other reviews I've done of Henry products, you know that that's always kind of been my gripe, is I really like the side loading option. And I can also say, having used some of the more modern Marlins, not including whatever is going to be coming out now that they're under new ownership, the loading gate on those was always a pain. The loading gate on this one was pretty much perfectly set right away, and has continued to be kind of that perfect tension ever since. So super happy about that. As we move back to the handguard, you might notice that this might not look like some of the pictures you've seen of the Henry X models here. You might be able to get a better look here. This is not the factory handguard that comes on it. It typically comes with an M-lock, or excuse me, a polymer handguard with a couple M-lock slots near the front along with your sling loop. However, I knew just kind of right away, having experience with these Midwest Industries handguards for the lever guns, that is something that's going to live on here, and it has allowed me to make this thing a little bit more practical than it might otherwise be in a more factory configuration. Now, especially the light up here is something you can do. This is one of the Surefire 640 Pros scout lights, so it attaches directly with M-lock, has its own built-in M-lock mount. That is something you should be able to do with the factory handguard. However, one thing you wouldn't be able to do is add one of these haptic quivers here on the side. So one of the big issues with lever guns has always been capacity, especially when you're jumping up to something the size of 4570. With a big old cartridge like this, you would need a pretty long barrel and magazine tube to get much of a capacity. The advertised capacity, I should mention, on this thing is 4+1. I have found that with most of the loadings that I do in 4570, I can usually get 5 in the magazine tube, so your results may vary depending on your cartridge overall length, for what that's worth. However, this here gives me now 6 additional rounds. Now, you do have to do some fine tuning to it, but it attaches directly via M-lock here, and I have really liked what this brings to the table. It basically, at a minimum, doubles the otherwise carrying capacity of this firearm. I do have the ability to still hold the firearm out in front. The light kind of gets in the way of that, but this doesn't impede my ability to hold on to the rifle in any way whatsoever, at least as I have found so far. Now, as we move back into the receiver here, everything here, again, other than what we've already talked about in the side loading gate, is going to be pretty standard if you're familiar with Henry repeating arms at all. We've got, in this case, it's not like a large loop per se. Hopefully I can hold this in a way where you can see that lever clearly. It's like a mix between a large loop and a small loop. It's just got that little bit of rounding that makes it easy and comfortable to throw that lever out. No sharp edges or anything like that. It's a good compromise to me without going obnoxiously large on the lever, but not going so small that it can be slightly uncomfortable. No manual thumb safety in this case, or cross bolt safety, which is my preference. I don't like that. I've explained that in my Marlin review. In this case, what we have is a transfer bar on the hammer. So if you're familiar with a lot of the modern revolvers, basically, if I wanted to have a round in the chamber, but not have this thing in a condition ready to fire, you want to be very careful when you're doing this, but I can pull the trigger, let the hammer move forward. Once it's moving forward, let go of the trigger, and then let that hammer come to rest in the forward position. And then when I want to, I can then manually cock the hammer back and pull the trigger. So it will not fire unless I am pulling the trigger. So I would much prefer that, where I'm not getting like a false positive where I have a crossbolt safety and it'll let me drop the hammer even and then not fire. I would rather have basically an inactive trigger with a hammer forward so that I know I have to cock it back and then it's ready to fire. So that is my preference there. Now, as we move back into the stock, oh, and I should also mention the trigger. The trigger on this thing is really nice. So as I lock this thing back, we'll do this thing left-handed so we can see here better, hopefully. It's almost like, it's not a true single stage trigger, but it almost feels like it. There's really hardly any pre-travel, just a little tiny bit of creep before it breaks. So it's like a really good single action trigger because that's what it is. It's very crisp. Once it breaks, there's not a lot of over travel. It's a really nice trigger. I have found it to make this thing, again, as well as I can possibly shoot a rifle like this one. No complaints whatsoever about the trigger. But again, as we're moving back here, one of the things that I have complained about in other Henrys that is not present here is I don't like straight wrists on my lever guns. The 4570s, and has been the case on 4570s in the past with Henry, is you have a slightly curved wrist here. That just, for me, puts my wrist at a much more ergonomic angle for being able to control this thing well. So I like that here. We do have a polymer stock, so if you're worried about weather or anything like that, you can either go with their all-weather series, which has the hard chrome on it with the kind of black furniture, or in this case, the polymer furniture, so you don't have to worry about that. Can also reduce some weight, but that's not necessarily a huge deal here. Then as we move back, you'll see this card here. If you're familiar with shotgun cards on shotguns, this is basically the same idea, but in 4570. So I got this idea, actually the idea for the quiver up here, from Chris Costa. He's been doing a lot of lever gun shooting recently, and I basically saw some of his guns and was like, I want that for myself. So I went ahead and made that happen. So I bought the ammo quiver here from Hoptic. And then I also picked up, or had my friend make one of these little cards here that holds 7 rounds of 4570. If I wanted to, I could have several of these and just stick them on to the Velcro on the stock. Again, without the quiver doubling at least my capacity. He went ahead and did a 7-shot card here for 4570. You can see I've got 5 in there and then 2 empty ones. But this puts it in a position where it's inconspicuous as a righty. The realistic usage of a lever gun that I have for it, I'm not going to be shooting this thing offhand, so I'm not terribly concerned about these getting in the way of a cheek weld. I am just worried about maintaining continuity of fire, I guess. And so having extra rounds here would be good. And again, I I would highly recommend checking this guy out if you have any needs of this sort, or if you just have any specific kind of custom nylon stuff you want done. Gunning with Scissors on Instagram is definitely the guy to talk to. Hopefully I'll have had his name on the screen already at this point, but put it on there again for good measure. He does good work. I did pay for it for what that's worth. So good dude over there. Really appreciate the work he does, and he did a really good job with that. I keep wanting to call it a shotgun card, but 4570 card. And then moving back to the butt pad here, it is rubber, but there's not a whole lot of give to it. So this thing can definitely be stout in recoil. Obviously there are other recoil pads you could put on there if you wanted to really kind of dampen things down. But again, for the vast majority of the shooting I did, this was plenty serviceable. So I know we took a long time there going over how this thing is configured, both out of the box from the factory, as well as how I have personally done it. So I appreciate you sticking with it with us there. So now we'll cut in some more footage, and then we'll go into kind of the overall pros and cons of this rifle. So to start out with the pros, I want to say just the ability to shoot this thing suppressed is pretty awesome. Again, having this thing threaded out of the box from the factory in a common thread pitch that you can get direct thread mounts for on 46 caliber or 45 caliber suppressors is a really good thing. So specifically, so far I have used the Silencer Co. Hybrid 46. If you watched the review I did on that suppressor, you'll have seen it shot with this rifle before, so hopefully none of that should come as a surprise to you. But the nice thing with 4570 is I can really up that grain weight of the projectile and get some pretty hard hitting subsonic loads. I can get in excess of 500 grain projectiles going just below the speed of sound, and it makes it very, very satisfying to shoot suppressed. You can get it really, really quiet, and I have found even with supersonic ammo, very similar to a bolt action rifle, all of that sound is going away from you because you have a locked action back here. So even with supersonic ammo outdoors, at least in my opinion, it's what I would define as hearing safe, especially with the rate of fire you're going to be putting down with a lever action in the first place. So this thing makes a really, really good suppressor host, and does so straight out of the box with no modifications necessary. Now, you have a bunch of different projectile options. You can do like this stuff here. This is, I believe, factory loaded 300 grain lead flat nose kind of hollow points. This stuff back here that almost looks like a lipstick container is 405 grain Acme, just solid lead projectiles. The 405 grain being kind of the original government spec. I've been doing a lot of shooting with these Acme bullets because it was cost effective, and they just worked really well, and again allowed me to keep it subsonic with just some really nice light shooting loads, which obviously being subsonic made it just a little bit more satisfying to shoot suppressed. Kind of continuing on with the pros, we have just really good attention to detail and build quality, which also contributes to really good reliability. Now, you would say it's hard to screw up a lever gun. However, some companies under different ownership have figured out ways to ruin lever guns for me. Again, I have a whole video on that. But the just quality and attention to detail is very noticeable in this one, along with every other Henry that I've come across. Again, the lever on this thing is nice and smoothed out, so there's no sharp corners that are going to be eating my hand up. Again, sights being even remotely close out of the factory can be a little bit different for some other manufacturers out there. The finish, the fit and finish just in general has been really good. So super happy with just the overall quality that I've seen from Henry rifles. And again, this is no exception to that. I've handled a lot working in a gun store. I've seen a lot. I've talked to a lot of other owners out there, and then also owning several other Henrys myself. I've been able to see that firsthand, and it's something that keeps me going back to Henry over and over. And then one of the other things that I really like about this thing versus other lever guns I've used is the sights. Again, I already mentioned it kind of early on in the video, but the fiber optic sights work really well. Again, you lose some of the low light, no light capability. However, adding a light like the Surefire 640 Pros makes up for some of that. I'll at least have some light now being transmitted through the fiber optics. So something to keep in mind, depending on what you're planning on using this for, that might not be an issue of having to worry about low light, but during the daylight or with any level of ambient light outside, they're going to work really, really well. Now, as far as the cons go, really it's going to come down to availability. So these things have been unobtainium really since they've been announced. Now, part of that is the misfortune of coming out right around the time that guns and ammo became nearly impossible to get a hold of. And kind of as a result of that, there are some people charging, I would say, unfair prices. Now, we can talk about the free market and people will pay what they just deem it to be worth. However, there are companies, one company in specific that I saw, at least before making this video, I wanted to see what the going rate was for these. There are retailers that have seemed to have gobbled up a bunch of Henry X models, and now we're selling them for several hundred more than MSRP through Gunbroker. That they can do that, and if people want to pay that, they can pay that. It just bums me out to see companies doing that and making it more difficult for us everyday average people to be able to get these in our hands and be able to properly enjoy them and appreciate them. So hopefully the availability, along with the availability of everything else, including ammo, gets better over time, but only time will tell on that. So again, do with that information, I guess, what you will. The MSRP, at least, for what you're getting, I think is very reasonable. Again, a very high quality built rifle that does everything and that it advertises to do, again, especially with the Suppressor ready in this case, everything that I could ask of it. So let's say, okay, well, all that is well and good, but why would I want a 4570 lever gun as opposed to literally anything else? And I think there are a few reasons why a person might want to do this. So especially if you're like me and you've been shooting AR-15s for years and years and years, and in some cases decades, I don't want to say you get bored of them, but you lose the novelty of just shooting an AR-15 in general. And so you kind of want to change things up from time to time. And this is going to allow you to do that. I've said it before in my lever gun reviews, I just really enjoy shooting lever action rifles. First of all, they're just iconically American, and especially with Henry, whose slogan is, if it's made in America or not at all, they're just an iconically American gun. It just brings us back to our heritage as Americans, although, albeit in this case, just a more modernized version of it. The other thing is it makes you more a part of the process. So it's like driving a stick shift versus driving an automatic. You feel more a part of it. You feel more engaged with what you're shooting. And to me, that can just make for a more enjoyable experience. And then on top of all that stuff, from a real world practicality perspective, this is a fantastic hunting cartridge, especially if we're talking, 150 yards and in, or 100 yards and in. 4570 has been very, very well displayed as a good brush gun or a good brush caliber in general. With the hog problem that we have here in the United States, 4570 will definitely take care of that, especially with having a suppressor on there. And I've even shot this with night vision and an IR laser, being able to do some nighttime pest control. will definitely allow you to do it with this. And then I'll be honest, I haven't had much time to play a lot of video games recently, but as I understand it, there's been more and more lever guns finding their way into Call of Duty. So if you want to be able to LARP like your favorite Call of Duty player, you can do that a little bit better possibly with this. And, you know, just all in all, this thing has just been a ton of fun. Again, you can go down to really nice little puff loads and, you know, 405 grain bullets going subsonic and just a real pleasant ammo to shoot. Or you can load this thing pretty hot to where you don't want to shoot more than a couple at a time. In fact, I was just using my Hornady reloading manual, loaded up some 350 grain projectiles to the loaded specs for the powder I was using, loaded up a full magazine tube, shot the first round, and realized I don't want to do that. That was super unpleasant. I didn't want to shoot the rest of them. However, I was there with my friend and I did not, you know, want to look like less of a man. So I went ahead and fired the whole thing. And we did some filming with it. Both of us had a terrible time shooting it. It was super, super awful. Not a good time, but it was fun in retrospect. And we were able to get some pretty large fireballs coming out of this thing. I'm gonna make sure. No, we're good. That's just a. I loaded 30 of those. I'm not shooting 30 of those today. Woo! You want to try? Okay, hold on. I'm gonna get another angle on this. I'm trying to catch this fireball. You feel it?
Yeah.
Feel it.
That kicks a lot harder than any of my other 4570s.
Jesus, mother of God!
Yeah. It's even a flamethrower, right? Right? And if you look at the breast, there's not even any high pressure signs.
It's like getting punched.
I know. Like I said,
somebody just haul off and just punch you straight in the shoulder.
So you can have the whole spectrum of ammo. And it's just a nice versatile package to be able to do that in. So if you're looking for a really awesome 4570 lever action rifle that gives you a lot of versatility as far as accessory mounting, using with night vision, suppressor mounting, and with minimal modification out of the box, I really think that the 4570 X models, or any of the X models for that matter, are definitely worth checking out if you can find one. And again, especially if you can find one at a reasonable price. Again, I think things are going to get better. We just got to give it time. People got to breathe, relax. Things will get better. So you might have to be a little bit patient to get these things again at a reasonable price. But I really like what Henry is doing. And again, seeing all of their models now available in a side loading option just makes me even more excited about what they have coming in the future. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and throw those in the comment section down below. Try to get back to you as quick as I can. Again, I want to say thanks to my patrons over on Patreon for making a video like this one possible. Ammo has been an enormous pain to get, and the vast majority of what I shot through this was my own hand loads, and all of that was paid for through my support over on Patreon. So because of that, I post all my content over there early. We do some exclusive content over there. In fact, I don't think I have it handy here. I'm working on a What Would Stoner Do rifle, kind of in line with what they're doing over on InRange TV. And I kind of went over what my build is over on my Patreon page so that those guys can get an idea of what's going on. More to come on that. But all that to say, I try to do as much as I can to help the people out over there because they're making such a big difference in what I'm able to do on my channel here. So if you want to help contribute to the channel, definitely head over there. If you can't afford it, I get it. Times have been super tough for over a year now. If you can like, share, anything like that, that honestly makes a big difference as well, because you know that YouTube is definitely not recommending my videos to your average Joe unless you're searching this thing out. So please consider doing all that stuff. But as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching. All right. Shooter ready.
Ready?
Stand by. How's that?
That was a lot better than those super hot loads.